47 years later, a source has come to light that could change everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley. His private nurse has finally broken her silence, and the insights are as shocking as they are heartbreaking. For decades, rumors and whispers surrounded the life and untimely death of the king of rock and roll. From alleged secrets to mysterious health issues, fans worldwide really want to know the answers that seem to be forever buried with him. But what truth did the nurse carry for almost half a century? What rumors did she confirm, and which ones did she dispel? But here's a warning: don't miss any part of this video. Everything is interconnected, as it might leave you questioning everything. A lot of people call Elvis Presley the king of rock and roll, but he was more than just a singer. Elvis changed the course of music as soon as he came into the public eye. He mixed gospel, blues, and rock into a style that captivated people all over the world. Over the course of his more than 20-year career, Elvis not only ruled the charts, but also inspired many artists who came after him. His electrifying stage presence and famous voice made his shows so captivating that he gained fans all over the world who saw him as more than just an artist. Elvis wasn't just a name. His music, style, and charisma broke social rules and made him a symbol of change and rebellion. But this kind of fame came with a cost. Behind the public admiration and the grandeur of Graceland was a man going through terrible personal problems. The media that praised his rapid rise also looked closely at his personal life. The news stories about him showed that he lived a wealthy life and had problems with his health and weight. He lived on the edge, testing the limits of what was possible and how far he could go. The shocking death of Elvis in 1977 shocked the whole world and broke the hearts of millions of fans. There are still a lot of open questions about how he died, which has led to a lot of rumors and speculation. No matter how many mysteries there are, one thing is clear: Elvis Presley's effect lives on. Because of his music, style, and unmatched legacy, he is a person that will always be important. Everybody knows him as a huge star, but his personal problems show us that even the biggest stars have problems behind the scenes. In Elvis Presley's life of fame and fortune, one person saw a side of him that not many others did: his private nurse. During Elvis's last years, she took care of him and became his friend as his health got worse and his problems grew. Because of her job, she was able to see things that most people didn't see. This makes her an important part of understanding Elvis's later years. The nurse talked about how Elvis had serious health problems that touched every part of his life. He had to deal with chronic pain and being dependent on prescription drugs every day, which was made worse by the stress of keeping up his star image. She saw him for herself as he went back and forth between being strong and weak, hiding his pain with his usual charm. Why did she decide to keep quiet for so long? The nurse said that the truth was too much to handle. It felt too heavy to talk about his problems so soon after he died, when everyone was still sad about losing their beloved hero. She was afraid that telling the truth about his last days would hurt the people who loved him. But now that her own death is getting close, she thinks it's time to tell her story and respect Elvis by showing what the myth is really about. The things she shared aren't just about his health. They're also about his mental problems. She talked about how Elvis often felt alone and confused because of the stress of being famous. In these honest moments between nurse and patient, we see a man who wants things to be normal, but is too busy with his crazy life to do so. Together, her stories give Elvis Presley's story more depth. They peel back the layers of his inflated persona to reveal the person beneath. A man with huge ability and huge pain. The nurse's disturbing discoveries about Elvis Presley's health show how deeply he struggled, even though he seemed to have it all together. People think that his health problems only started in his later years, but they didn't. The nurse said that Elvis had serious long-term illnesses for a long time before he died too soon. Fans and the media never really understood how complicated and hard these situations were to deal with. One of the worst problems was that he had constant pain that wouldn't go away. Not only was he physically hurting, but he was also under a lot of pressure to keep up his legendary position. The nurse said that Elvis was in so much pain some days that he could hardly stand or move. Even with all of these problems, he kept performing for his fans, pushing his body to its limits. His firm determination to give his all on stage, even when he was sick or hurt, added a tragic side to his life that stood in sharp contrast to the image of invincibility he gave to the world. Another critical revelation was that he relied too much on prescription drugs. The nurse told him that these medicines were first given to him to help with his pain and other health problems, but over time they turned into tools and made people dependent on them. This dependence wasn't caused by using drugs for fun, it was a desperate attempt to deal with his health getting worse. His nurse talked about how his medication use increased over time, causing a cycle that made his health problems worse. One of the most disputed parts of the nurse's story is probably what happened before Elvis died. Her claims make it sound like both personal and professional negligence may have played a big part in his sad death. The nurse talked about a specific event that happened just before he died. She told them that Elvis had said he was having chest pains one night. Even though she told him he should go to the hospital, he refused. She was very worried about this choice, but she also said that Elvis's refusal to get medical help was typical. He often played down his symptoms, either because he didn't want to be seen as weak or because he didn't want to face his health problems head on. The nurse added to the sadness by implying that people around Elvis did not always have his best interests at their core. She said that some people in his inner group put upholding his public image above taking care of his worsening health. These actions, or lack of actions, may have played a part in the chain of events that led to his death, either because they were denied or because they weren't aware of them. The nurse also made hints that Elvis's medical care might not have been as good as it could have been. She talked about a place where doctors were quick to give him medicine, but took a long time to treat the real problems that were making him sick. This reactive method, along with Elvis's own reluctance to follow through with more proactive care, made things very dangerous. Last but not least, these revelations raise haunting questions about whether Elvis's death could have been prevented. Did he not get the help he needed because of pride, fear, or a mix of things inside and outside of himself? The nurse's story doesn't give any clear answers, but it does show how complicated the situation was. A depressing blend of bad decisions made by individuals and mistakes made by professionals that had an inevitable result. His private nurse said that Elvis Presley's need for medicines was one of the most upsetting things about his life. She said that Elvis wasn't completely to blame for his dependence. It was also caused by the people and places around him. The nurse told him that many of the medicines he was taking were not really needed. Instead, they were often given by doctors who cared more about Elvis's happiness than his health. The nurse talked about times when doctors and nurses who worked closely with Elvis gave in to the pressure of being famous. Instead of following ethical medical practices, some doctors gave out a lot of drugs because they knew it would make them like them. This behavior made Elvis more dependent and made his situation worse over time. Then, the woman talked about how many times she had tried to help by telling Elvis to take less medicine. Her appeals were often ignored. Elvis didn't want to do these things. He insisted that the medicines were necessary to deal with his constant pain and the demands of his job. In the past, the nurse remembered that his defense was caused by both physical trust and mental stress. He turned to drugs as a way to deal with the stress of keeping up his public image and the heavy weight of fame. It was a vicious cycle in which people's efforts to make Elvis feel better ended up making his health worse. It shows how his need for medications was complicated by his physical problems, his mental problems, and the people who helped him. Elvis Presley had to pay a huge price for his fame. His personal nurse said that being the king of rock and roll put a lot of stress on him that no one could understand. Because Elvis was so famous and successful, he was always in the public eye. This constant attention hurt his mental and emotional health. The nurse said that Elvis often felt like his fame was holding him back. Because he was so famous, he could not go on even the smallest trips without a crowd of fans following him around. Everyone in the world loved him, but it took away his peace and privacy. Elvis was very upset about this loss of normalcy. He told the nurse a lot of times that he felt stuck and wanted a simpler life where people didn't always expect him to perform or meet their unrealistic standards. On top of that, the stress came from having to keep up his public image. Elvis knew that a lot of people looked up to him, so he worked very hard to live up to their hopes. Behind the glitz and glamour of his shows was a man who was under a lot of pressure to stay in the perfect shape that his fans wanted. He felt emotionally tired and more alone after all of this work. Elvis often felt like people didn't understand him, even those closest to him. His nurse told him that even though he was surrounded by people, it was hard for him to make real bonds, because many of his relationships were tainted by the fact that he was famous. Being alone made the mental load he carried every day even heavier. This part shows the hard things that Elvis had to deal with behind the scenes. This part of his story is very different from the glossy picture of fame because it shows how much emotional and mental stress fame caused him. These stresses, along with his health problems, shaped the course of his last years, tying together success and pain in ways that few could understand. There have been many stories about Elvis Presley's life and death over the years. These rumors range from his health problems to the way he supposedly lived his life. Fans and reviewers alike kept making guesses about what happened to him, but there was never any official proof to put these ideas to rest. Now, after 47 years, Elvis's private nurse has come forward to answer some of these unanswered questions and put an end to stories that have been going around for decades. The nurse told some very important things about Elvis's health, especially his heart. She revealed that Elvis did have a serious heart condition, which had been talked about but never officially admitted to the public. She said that this condition put a lot of stress on Elvis's body and made his health problems worse overall. The nurse talked about how this heart problem, along with his busy schedule, made it harder and harder for him to keep up his legendary acts. For fans who looked up to his mythical, bigger-than-life image, this news makes the king of rock and roll seem more real and weak. Just as powerful is the nurse's admission that Elvis has problems with being dependent on prescription drugs. There have been reports about his addiction for decades, but the nurse gave a more nuanced view of the situation. She told him that his addiction wasn't caused by using drugs for fun, but by a real need to deal with constant pain and other health problems. She said that even though Elvis was dependent on these drugs, he always tried to keep some control, even as the stress of his fame and his health got worse, pushed him further into this dependence. These proofs shed light on the problems Elvis had, giving us a moving look into the complicated story of his life. Fans find it sobering to think about how much fame and sickness hurt their idol's body and mind. Of all the shocking things Elvis Presley's private nurse told them, one stands out as especially scary. It's so unsettling that it makes you wonder how he really died. The nurse thought that Elvis's death may have been more complicated than what was stated. She made it sound like his death might not have been completely normal, which has left both fans and experts with new questions. The nurse talked about something that happened a few days before Elvis died. She said it was strange and upsetting. Someone strange came to Graceland and said they had important business to discuss with Elvis. No one knows who this person is or what they are doing because the information was never made public. But what really worried the nurse was how this visit seemed to be affecting Elvis. She remembers how he seemed incredibly upset and distant after the event, which was very different from how he usually behaved. This incident brings up a disturbing question. Could this unknown stranger have had something to do with Elvis's untimely death? Even though the nurse didn't say specifically what was wrong, what she said makes it sound like Elvis may have been facing threats or stresses that were kept from the public. In those last days, was he scared of someone or something? And it's more scary to hear what the nurse had to say about Elvis Presley's death. It calls into question the story that his death was only caused by medical problems. This lets people think that outside forces may have had an effect on the tragedy. Fans and scholars are shocked and saddened by this news, which has started new conversations about the king's last days and the secrets that may have died with him. In spite of all the fame and glamour that Elvis Presley had, his personal nurse said that he really wanted a life away from the attention. He wasn't always ready to pay the price for the love of millions of people. He felt stuck in a world where everyone was looking at every part of his life because of his fame. Elvis told his nurse that he secretly longed for a simple life, one that he could have had if he hadn't become famous. He often talked about times when he imagined being a normal guy, not carrying the weight of being the king of rock and roll all the time. Whether he was sitting quietly at Graceland or thinking during late-night talks, Elvis often talked about how much he missed not having to deal with the stress of being famous. The nurse talked about times when Elvis would sit by himself and look for comfort in the quiet. These were not just breaks from his public life, they were chances for him to get back in touch with the person he thought he had lost in the rush of his career. She saw a man who, despite having a huge public profile, really valued the small personal pleasures that fame had taken away from him. He also said that he didn't want to be known for the scandals and controversies that the tabloids loved to write about, but for how much he loved and worked hard at his music. Elvis loved making art more than anything else. It was how he showed how he felt, connected with others, and left a memory that went beyond fame. The nurse's story shows a side of Elvis that most people don't see. A man who wanted to be real and simple, even though he was a worldwide star. As Elvis Presley's nurse told her story, she hoped that her words would help as many fans understand and find peace. Her admissions weren't just a story of his problems, they were a touching tribute to the real person behind the legend. She saw Elvis as more than just a cultural hero. She saw him as a deeply flawed but amazing person who gave everything he had to his job and his fans. She wanted everyone to know that Elvis was a man who, behind all the glitz and glamour, faced huge problems with guts and strength. The nurse told him that his weaknesses did not make him less important. Instead, they helped people relate to him more as a person who, despite his flaws, had a kind heart and a drive to do his best. Her story showed how hard Elvis's never-ending quest for perfection was on his mind and body. In her story, she talked about how his constant commitment to his singing often hurt his own health. But Elvis cared most about his fans. As a result, he felt responsible for making them happy, which pushed him to perform in spite of pain and tiredness in ways that people would remember. Elvis Presley's huge public image often overshadowed the serious mental problems he had when he wasn't around other people. For millions of fans, he was the king of rock and roll. His charm, voice, and presence lit up stages and screens all over the world. But behind all the glamour, Elvis had emotional wounds that he kept to himself for years. One of the biggest things that hurt Elvis's mental health was his unstable home life. He had a frightening void in his life because he lost his twin brother Jesse Garon Presley at birth. Many people who knew Elvis thought that this early disaster made him feel alone and gave him an endless need to be accepted. Even though there were a huge number of fans and a lot of love for him, he often felt empty, and that fame couldn't fill. Another important reason was how he got along with his parents, especially his mother, Gladys Presley. Her relationship with Elvis was so close that he called her his rock. When she died in 1958 while he was in the military, the sadness was unbearable. People who knew Elvis said that he was never the same after she died. He pulled away from people and relied more on the people close to him for mental support. As Elvis's fame grew, so did the number of people who wanted to see and hear him. The never-ending routines, close attention, and stress of being in the public eye all the time started to wear them down. Over the years, he grew more and more alone, and he went to Graceland to escape the public and find peace. The few people who really knew him saw a man who struggled with self-doubt and often wondered if he was good enough, even though he had been so successful. His personal relationships were also causing him a lot of trouble. Many people praised his marriage to Priscilla Presley, but the stresses of his work, rumors of cheating, and the fame eventually led to their split. Losing his family broke his heart and made his mental problems worse. This made him want to live alone even more. Elvis also had a hard time keeping relevant in the music business, which is always changing. As new artists came out and styles changed, he sometimes wondered where he fit in the world he helped make. He worked harder, even if it hurt his health and well-being, because he was afraid of being ignored. Most people couldn't see Elvis Presley's emotional fights, but they were an undeniable part of who he was. He made choices based on them, formed relationships, and even changed his songs. This made the legend the world knew more complicated. By recognizing these problems, we learn more about Elvis as a person, not just as a famous figure. He had problems just like everyone else. Elvis Presley's life is one of triumph and tragedy, of unparalleled talent and unbearable pain. The revelations of his private nurse shed new light on the man behind the legend and proved that even icons are not immune to life's struggles. If this video helped you to know more about your icon, the King, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others. And if you want to know more hidden truths about your favorite legend, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more videos.